One of my two brothers lives in North Carolina with his family, and he works in forestry. And so whenever I see a tree and I don't know what kind of tree it is, which is about 98% of the time, I can take a picture of the tree or the bark of the tree or a leaf on the tree, and I can text it to him. And usually within about 5 minutes, I can get a text back telling me what kind of tree it is. He's very good at identifying those things. The 2% of the time that I do know what kind of tree it is, it's usually because, for example, it has an apple hanging from it. And I know that it's not a lemon tree, right? I know it's an apple tree because there's an apple on it, right? And so far, I have not found a lemon tree with an apple hanging on it, or an orange tree with a peach hanging on it, or anything like that. Right? So far, in my experience, I am 100% sure that if I see a fruit hanging from a tree, that's the kind of tree it is. This is an image that I think St. Paul is using in today's second reading, when St. Paul contrasts the works of the flesh and the fruits of the Spirit. Jesus in the Gospels says, "By their fruits you will know them." In other words, the things that they bear in their lives will tell you who is at work in their hearts and in their souls. And in the second reading today, St. Paul kind of fleshes that out a little bit, right? So the works of the flesh, he says, are obvious: immorality, impurity, lust, idolatry, sorcery, hatreds, rivalry, jealousy, outbursts of fury, acts of selfishness, dissensions, factions, occasions of envy, drinking bouts, orgies, and the like. And then he says, in contrast, the fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, self-control. In other words, he's saying, if you want to know whether the Holy Spirit is active in a person's life or whether they are driven by the flesh, then you just have to look at the fruits that their lives bear. And really what he's doing is he's inviting the Galatians into kind of this examination of conscience. And I'm sure many of you have, in preparing for confession, looked at one of those examination of conscience, right, where it just is a list of all these questions, right? Did you do this thing? Did you do this thing? Did you do this thing? This is a very similar thing that St. Paul is doing. Right? He's inviting the Galatians into this examination of their lives to say, what are the fruits that my life is bearing? Am I living in immorality, impurity, lust, idolatry, sorcery, hatreds, rivalry, jealousy, all of these things? Or is my life marked by love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, generosity, faithfulness, and self-control? I think today, on this Feast of Pentecost, is a perfect time for every one of us to enter into this same examination. If you need to, take your worship aid home, right? But spend some time today looking at this passage and using this passage, looking at your own life. If you're anything like me, then there's probably a mix of these things in your life. Right? We can see times in which we're living in the fruits of the Holy Spirit, when our lives are marked with joy and peace and patience and faithfulness and generosity. And there's times when our lives are marked by these works of the flesh that St. Paul outlines. And when we look at those things in our life, when we look at those things that mark our life, and when we see the fruits of the Spirit, when we see the action of the Holy Spirit in our life, when we see him working and moving us towards these things, we can be thankful that we've allowed the Lord to work in some way in our heart, and that the Lord has moved us, and that he's truly active and present in our life and bringing us deeper into holiness. And when we look at our lives and we see these works of the flesh, that recognition in itself is a work of the Spirit. The Spirit moves our consciences to recognize our sin in our lives so that we can open that sin up to the Lord and allow his grace to come in and to move us away from that sin, to move us toward virtue, to move us toward living our life in the Spirit and bearing his fruits. So today, as we celebrate this Mass and as we celebrate this great feast of Pentecost, and we remember when the Lord first sent down his Spirit on the apostles to move them and transform them powerfully and to prepare them for their mission to go out and to preach the gospel, we ask that that same powerful Spirit would come upon each and every one of us, that we can constantly devote ourselves to the service of the gospel, and that his fruits would be born in our lives, that we can live in the Spirit, we can live in that relationship with God for which we were created, and allowing ourselves to be moved by the Spirit to bear these fruits in our lives, we can truly find the fulfillment that we're actually seeking every time we live in any of these works. Whenever we live in the works of the flesh, what we're truly seeking is fulfillment. We're seeking some kind of rest for our restless hearts. But as St. Augustine says, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." And as much as we try to seek fulfillment in all of these other things, as much as we try to still the restlessness of our hearts with all of these works of the flesh, we will fail every time. Because that restlessness can only be brought to rest, that love, that joy, and that peace that come from the fulfillment of our human nature can only be found in the Lord, can only be found in living in a deep and loving relationship with God, animated by the Spirit. And if we allow ourselves to live animated by that Spirit, then we will find ourselves rejoicing forever with him in his heavenly kingdom.